Warm welcome once again to this gathering. We've been at it since the morning, Mr. Scindia, and you heard the title of the session. This is not going to be a here and now or to talk about the past really, but for you to really sketch out. It's the 10th year of the Modi government. You've been handling the civil aviation portfolio and now the steel portfolio, but I'll focus on aviation for the time being. Tell our audience and viewers here, how have Indians' dream to fly taken shape in the past 10 years? How would you summarize this to start this conversation?
So let me start, Siddharth, at the outset. Civil aviation was always considered as an elitist mode of travel. It was a mode of travel that was reserved, quote unquote, for a select few across the country. It was a mode of travel that was primarily limited to Tier 1 and some Tier 2 cities. And with the economic growth engine of the country, expansion of greater number of Tier 3 cities, Tier 3 moving to Tier 2 status, Tier 2 moving to Tier 1 status, and really the push on behalf of the Prime Minister to convert civil aviation as a means of travel for every citizen of this country. Because one of the primary precepts of that notion, and if we look back in time, let's say over the last 40 years, what has changed in your life and our lives? The one thing that has changed is that increasingly we have paucity of time. The luxury that probably the generation before us had, or even us in our early years, today every minute counts, and if you will, every second counts. And therefore, the first question that is asked is the connectivity to a particular city or a particular place before one goes and wants to settle there, before one wants to get a job there, before industrialists like all of you seated in this audience want to invest there. And therefore, it became mandatory, and I'm using that word very fairly and squarely, to both spread the breadth and the depth of civil aviation. Now, what has resulted as a means of that imperative and that goal? Like in any organization, you need to be able to set goals, have a vision, have a mission, and then set goals to achieve that vision. The Prime Minister, through Udan, Ude Desh Ka Aam Nagrik, has led to a proliferation of travel in hitherto unconnected cities. Many cities that probably you and I have never visited, such as Jharsuguda in Orissa, Rupsi in Assam, Kishangarh in Rajasthan, are now connected by air, Darbhanga. And the number of travelers from these tertiary cities, excessive of 100,000 to 500,000 per year. So let me tell you now the transformation of that over the 10 years that Siddharth has asked. Let's start with first the number of travelers in our country. Domestic travelers have grown from 6 crore in 2014 to 14.5 crore last year. That's almost close to 170% increase. What's my forecast? 14.5 crore today, by 2030 or 2035, is going to go to 42.5 crore. So you're going to see a 3x jump from where we are today. And why is that? Because the economies of scale argument has now stepped into civil aviation. So for example, one of the most ubiquitous items today in our lives, which we can't do without, which is this little box that we all carry around, which sometimes becomes more important than our friends and family sitting around with us. This box, when I came back to India after university in the States, when the first mobile phone was introduced, used to cost 1 lakh rupees each. It was 16 bucks a minute for voice calls. Today you can get one of these boxes at 3,500 rupees. Voice is free. The same revolution, the silent revolution, has happened in civil aviation. Today our fares are equal to first class AC fares. And why I'm saying first class AC fares is because the airplane by its very manufacturer has an air conditioner in it. So I can only compare it to first AC, right? So that's the number of travelers that you're going to look at. Second, if you look at the number of travelers today, first AC and second AC in rail is 18.5 million. Civil aviation is 14.5 million. But the delta, the CAGR, in railways is 5.3%, the compounded annual growth rate. Civil aviation is 10.6%. So in the next 7 to 8 years, I put a statement out there that civil aviation will exceed the number of travelers only limited to first AC and second AC of railways. I'm not talking about the whole of railways. Only first AC, second AC. Second, the number of airports in our country. From independence till 2014, which is roughly 67 years, we built 74 airports. Average one airport per year. From 2014 till date, we have built 148 airports in total, which means a delta of 74, including heliports and waterdromes, which means 7.5 per year as opposed to 1 per year. That's the monumental change, not incremental, but monumental change. For this year, I have a target of building close to about 18 to 20 airports and heliports. Where is this number going to? Just like I told you about passenger traffic. In the next 5 years, I see this number of 148 crossing 200. That's the kind of depth that you're going to see in civil aviation. Third, number of aircraft. In 2014, we had roughly 400 aircraft in the country. We today have 700, which means there's been an increase of between 75 to 80% aircraft fleet capability in the last 10 years. Where do I see this number going by 2030, 35? Easily this number of 700 crossing close to 1,200 to 1,300 aircraft in the country. So the growth of civil aviation, both in its depth and its breadth, is going to be monumental in this country. I'm going to end my answer with one data point for you. If you look at Delhi Airport today, Delhi Airport today has 4 runways. Delhi Airport today has a throughput capability of close to 70 million passengers. By the end of this year or early next year, Delhi Airport will grow to 109 million passengers. Now, what does that mean? That means that Delhi Airport, in terms of throughput capability, is going to be among the top 3 airports in the world. So that is the monumental trajectory that we are talking about for civil aviation. And that's the way the country is going to transform from a logistics standpoint, from a transportation standpoint, from metro cities down to tertiary cities.
Wonderful data here, and since we are looking ahead, how significant is the decision, and I believe it was amongst the bravest, most radical, most impactful decisions by the Modi government, which is to let go of Air India in some ways. And we've seen the numbers and the aircraft order that has been placed. By some estimates, that will lead to a very significant increase even in the employment, just by that order alone, Mr. Scindia. How would you describe that deal? And when we look ahead 3, 4, 5 years, what will its impact be on our aviation sector?
So my first point I'd like to make to all the critics out there that had created a bedlam of opposition to the concept of the disinvestment of Air India. In a period of less than a year, look at the transformation that has happened through this one huge push in the area of civil aviation. A carrier that was looking at losses mounting at close to 600 crores per month. And mind you, this is not government of India's money. This is your money. It is taxpayers' money. Today, through that divestment, not only has it led to a new initiative from the private sector, not only has it led to greater customer sat, to use economic lingo, to greater OTP, on-time performance. Today, Air India's on-time performance has gone from 67% to something close to 86%. Not only has it led to a better brand positioning and a better serviceability, but also it will result in the achievement of India's aims. Forget about one particular business group or one particular airline, but India's aims to really reach for the sky. Could you or I have imagined that one single airline in India will close the biggest deal of aircraft acquisition in the history of civil aviation in the world till today? 470 aircraft at a ticket price of close to $70 to $75 billion. That's the kind of leap, and I'm using this word very carefully, quantum leap, that we have seen happening in Air India. What will that result in? You will have the latest aircraft coming into India's fleet, whether it is Boeing, whether it's the A350. Most importantly for me, as Civil Aviation Minister, not only will I see a greater density of routes being plied within India, but what has been my passion from the day I was entrusted with this responsibility, I want to regain our position on the international skies, a position that India held in the 60s and 70s once again. And through this acquisition, wherein Indigo with 500 aircraft and Air India with 470 aircraft, over the next 5 years, the delivery is not tomorrow, over the next 5 to 10 years, but 70 wide-bodied aircraft on the Air India deal and close to a high number, 30 to 40 aircraft, A321 XLRs on the Indigo deal, we will be able to take the Indian flag all across the world, direct flights, whether it's the European subcontinent, whether it's America, whether it's Africa, and regain our market share on the international front. So I believe that we are in for a huge transformation with regard to civil aviation, and a country that today holds its national flag high domestically within the country, a country that's held its national flag high across the world, our Tiranga, and our Tiranga, which on the 23rd of August got planted, or rather supplanted, on the moon. That Tiranga will also fly across the 7 seas on our carriers across India to other parts of the world.
That's a wonderful aspiration, and viewers, imagine, and I'm sure...
It's not an aspiration, Siddharth. We
It's
will
a reality.
make it happen.
It's a reality.
We will make it happen. I want to assure everyone seated here and through your channel, across the length and breadth of our country, we will make it happen.
Absolutely, and 3 cheers for that. I was just on the point of direct connectivity. All of you must have traveled and you would have seen old parents on these hopping flights trying to find their way through airports, and that's when I felt that, imagine you have these people who take flights from India, go to some other destination, hang there for 4-5 hours, then go there and their children are waiting. Direct flights is the future. So Mr. Scindia, thank you very much for making that point. The third aspect is, and
also our airlines and our aircraft cannot be taxis anymore. Right now, my international hub is not in India. My international hub is either on my eastern border or on my western border. So if you look at my population and my citizens in my country, 70% of them take a taxi outside to the eastern border or the western border and then get onto the flight to go to their ultimate destination. I want to change that. I want my citizens to be able to take a flight from their country, from their international hub within India to where they want to go eventually. And my dream, Siddharth, and my aspiration, if you ask me for my aspiration, is not to create an international hub in India. That is a reality. It's going to happen. And we are starting with Delhi. My hub and my aspiration, if you ask me, is to create multiple international hubs in India. And in our country, we have that capability. Because if we are going to go from 14.5 million travelers to 42.5 million travelers, it is an imperative and must happen in India. We must have a hub in South India, a hub in Central India, a hub in Western India, a hub in Eastern India. All international hubs.
Absolutely, and our geography absolutely permits that. You actually took away the question, so I'm going to skip and ask you. Since the morning, starting with Nitin Gadkari ji, we have had some phenomenal comments made here, and one of those was also to do with the fact that Borge Brende said, forget the G20, you should talk about the G3, US, China and India. The question I have for you is, with all these dreams that are going to fructify very soon, can we ever hope that there will be a made in India jumbo jet on which the ordinary Indian can fly?
So again, let me tell you, it's no longer a dream. It will be a reality very soon. Something that we could never contemplate. But for the first time in India's history, one of the airplane majors has taken a very, very bold step. The first time between Airbus and Boeing, you have Airbus that has supplanted a production facility within India for the C295 aircraft, based in Vadodara. Our order is for 56 aircraft. 16 will come fully built out in their facility in Spain. The balance 40 will be made in India. Prime Minister himself has laid the foundation stone for that close to 6 months ago. And 40 aircraft with a capital investment, a joint venture between Airbus and the Tata Group, will be produced in India at a capex of close to 21,000 crores, close to 5,400 assemblies and sub-assemblies. For those aircrafts will be sourced by the OEM, in this case Airbus Tata joint venture, through ancillaries in India. Companies like Bharat Dynamics and others will be supplying equipment directly to this Airbus ventures situated in Vadodara. So it's already a reality that's happening. The next step naturally should be ultimately seeing aircraft manufacturing happening in India. A lot of the sub-assemblies are already happening. For example, the fuselage of the Apache helicopters are being made in India. The tail fins of the 737s are being made in India. The appendages of the C-130J Hercules aircraft are being made in India. Collins Aerospace is making, God forbid we never have to use them, but the emergency chutes that come out of passenger aircraft doors, those are being manufactured in India. So India is on her way. India is on her path to eventual aircraft manufacturing in India, starting from the C295 facility in Vadodara.
Absolutely. A round of applause for that too. I'm going to turn away from aviation because we've been taking a sort of broad view of where we stand today and where we are to go. The Prime Minister has given us a fantastic interview, the only one on the G20, where he shared a lot of information. On a broader level, the confidence that we seem to be now generating across the world, especially with what is happening to China, and you've been in public life for so many years, how would you describe this moment? Because in the past also, Mr. Scindia, there have been, India has arrived and this is India's moment. But what do you feel about the present?
Well, I think two tectonic shifts have taken place. If you look across the world's history, and you've got me thinking, Siddharth, but there are two inflection points that happen that change the stature of a country in the global comity of nations. The first is the rising of an economic superpower. So whether it was America 100 years ago, and by the way, what's the success of the American story, the economic story? The success of the American economic story is not hyper growth at 10% for 4-5 years and a blip. The success story of the US economic supremacy is growing at 3 to 4%, but compounding that growth over 100 years. And that compounding is the marvel that we need to focus on in our country. So for me, a 10% growth rate for 1 year doesn't excite me. But a 7.5% growth rate over a decade leads to transformation. And India has reached there. So the first is the emergence of an economic superpower across multiple fronts. India has always been, in its journey of 67 years, known for its prowess in either very few areas or maybe one vertical. And the latest to happen in my lifetime was the IT vertical. We were always known as a services power. 60% of our GDP also came from, close to 60% came from services. But we were always a services power, not a products power. And the value lies in product. For the first time, India is firing not double engine ki sarkar, but in this case, triple engine ki sarkar. We are firing on services. Our engine is firing on manufacturing. Our engine is firing on agriculture. So for the first time, India is moving both in terms of breadth and depth. And that is leading to us displacing the one country that thought they could rule over us, the United Kingdom. Today they are in 6th place and we are in 5th place. And the Prime Minister has promised, third term, number 3 economic superpower in the world. We will displace Germany and Japan and become the number 3 economic superpower by 2028. That's on one front, which is the economic front. But to me, Siddharth, as important as the economic front is the soft power front. And it is for the first time in our history, and something that has been spearheaded by the Prime Minister himself, that India today has risen as a soft power in the world. Whether it is the power of yoga, the fact that you have World Yoga Day, and at the United Nations you have 300 countries sitting side by side with India, practicing yoga. Whether it is COVID, and for a country that would go begging for vaccines, whether it is BCG, smallpox or whatever, that country today is producing 2 COVID vaccines, and not only producing 2 COVID vaccines, vaccinating her population twice over, 220 crore vaccines. And not only that, but exporting vaccines, vaccine Maitri, to 100 countries across the world. That is an exposition of soft power. The Ukraine-Russian conflict, Operation Ganga, where for the first time in the world's history, 23,000 students stuck in the middle of no man's land. And only one country in the world sends 90 sorties of civilian aircraft, 20 sorties of military aircraft to 5 countries on the border of Ukraine and pulls out all 23,000 citizens of her country and neighboring countries, whether it's Bangladesh, whether it's Nepal, even Pakistan, and brings them back safely to India and transports them back to their home country. So today, whether it is on the issue of health, whether it's in the issue of world conflict, India's voice does not only resonate, India is looked upon to find a solution. India is looked upon to deliver what could be a possible solution for not only the South or the global South, but for the world. And that rudiment paradigm has changed across the world for us as a nation.
Absolutely, and here's to that change. As you say, Bharat Bhagya Vidata, our moment seems to have finally arrived. Jyotiraditya Scindia, there was much more to discuss, but we're out of time. Thank you very much. As always, you were brilliant. A round of applause for
Thank
the
you very
Minister.
much for having me.
Thank you.